Welcome to Property Addicts Australia, your home for everything property investing. Get an insider's view of what really works when building a portfolio. Learn how to avoid the common mistakes, plus get all the tips and tricks from the property investing experts Sana and Mona Ali. Join us to learn from the experts and set yourself up for long-term success in property investing. Proudly powered by propertytwins.com.au.
Welcome to the Property Addicts Australia podcast. We are Sana and Mona Ali, the Property Twins. We are mortgage brokers and buyers agents helping clients all over Australia build investment property portfolios. In this episode, we interview Mat Djolic, co-founder of HTAG Analytics, one of Australia's leading proptech platforms. In this episode, we talk about the power and pitfalls of data in property investing, how investors can use the data the right way, why so many people get stuck in analysis paralysis, and the common misconceptions that lead to poor investment decisions. We also cover the overuse and misuse of data in property investing and why really it's become such a buzzword and how to separate fact from fiction. We also touch on the biggest mistakes buyers and property experts make when using data and how to avoid them. We also cover why data alone is not enough and how experienced buyers agents and investors use it as a tool, not as a decision maker. Let's get started. Welcome, Matt, to Property Addicts Australia.
Thank you. Thank you, girls, for inviting me. Good to be here.
Well, Matt, tell us a bit about yourself, your story, how you entered HTAG Analytics. Where did it all start?
Yeah. How long do I have? So I started, everyone started as an investor, I guess, in this domain of property investment. So started as an investor and was interested in finding areas that will grow. So I was using data back then. I was using it, if you remember, my investment property magazine. They escapes me now. So the back they had statistics about certain metrics. But I remember back then it was only monthly based because I think, and don't quote me on it, used to come out every month. And I used to think that it's not sufficient because I need to understand the trends and movements in those points or metrics across time so I can make a better decision. And when I say make a better decision, when you have a trend, you can actually sort of interpret what's going to happen in the future and predict. Anyway, I was shuffling around, constructing my own spreadsheets, combinations, all these other things, because when I start working on something, I'm sort of obsessed, trying to find every detail that I can. And then I met, by accident, essentially, I met my business partner, co-founder of HTAG Analytics. We went on a mandate because I knew his mum, and his mum said, "Oh, you're going to meet my son, you got to do this." And it was weird for me. But anyway, we went out, had a couple of drinks, and he was back then a senior software architect for Westpac. So he had that techie side, and he was also an investor. And we started chatting about a few things, and let's create something for ourselves, so we can invest better. And, one thing led to another, and here we are today. But, essentially the main aim was to develop something for ourselves so we can actually use the data information better to make purchasing decisions. I remember when I started off, buyers agents used to have seminars, used to hold seminars, I guess as a lead generating thing. And there was a lot of value provided in some, which was great. So it was a learning experience for me. And I remember I went to a seminar once. It was a well-known buyer's agent. They were doing well, I remember they were holding seminars somewhere in the CBD. What's that? I remember what the name of that iconic building is. And I approached them later and I said, "Are you guys looking at Southwest Sydney?" They're like, "No." And I remember they were looking at Gladstone back then and all these, Queensland areas. I didn't know much about it, so I took it on face value. But it was interesting for me that they actually weren't looking at Southwest Sydney because I was going through websites, council websites, and I was seeing that they want to create a whole new hub over there because the airport that was actually coming later, I think they were saying 500,000 new people need to move in Southwest Sydney. And I saw, because I was living next door, and they were building roads, infrastructure, like it was just money was being pumped into the area. And it didn't make sense to me that, when they said, it's not on our radar. And I'm like, that's weird. And then I started realizing that, not everyone understands and can pinpoint areas that are going to grow. And whoever invested in Southwest Sydney back then did it phenomenal, you know. I bought in Gregory Hills 15 or more years ago. I think I bought land that was 600 square meters for 250K. Now that land alone is 800, you let alone the building component of it, you know. So it did very well. And yeah, I realized, okay, there's a gap. We got to do something about this, you know. So that's how we started, yeah.
Well, I guess it's a little bit similar to, you know, when we started out, we were actually manually calculating some of the metrics and all. There were no software or tools like HTAG available to get that data readily. So we had to manually work out, or when was the last peak, what happened historically, where the price is at, and work that out. I'm just curious, just out of curiosity, you mentioned Alex, you met your business partner many years ago. So how long ago did the HTAG idea came about?
Yeah, so it's a good thing that we both have a personality that's obsessed, because I used to work in my previous role. I was an estimating manager for Tier 2 and Tier 3 companies, construction companies. So, you know, very senior role, but I always need something extra to sort of keep my mind busy. And when we started working on, we started developing ideas. It's been 7 years now, I think 6 or 7 years. But yeah, we started working on it part-time, non-stop. Every day we finish work, we start thinking about things. And Alex was the person who was building, because he knows coding and you know, software essentially. I was more like a mystery shopper, where I'm very good at, probably the only thing that I'm good at is pattern recognition and connecting things into, you know, something that makes sense. So I would be a mystery shopper, and I would use the information that or whatever he builds, and I would say, okay, let's do this way or that way. And it just sort of was evolving. And it's interesting, we're never thinking about selling the product initially, because it was primarily for us. And then when it came to a certain level where we saw, okay, there's something out there, we started putting it out, but we never marketed the product I think for the first 4 years, we never did any marketing. You know, we had some subscribers, but, and any feedback that we get from subscribers would improve the product, but there was no, I guess, direct sell or push, you know, because it was still working full time at that time. So it's been 7 years, but I think if I had to say, we both started working full time on it. Alex before me, I think Alex maybe 4 years. Again, don't quote me. It's been 3 years for me. And yeah, that's when we really started, you know, okay, this is our business now. We're going to improve it. This is what we're doing. So
well, it reminds us of the time we connected back in early 2021, right? In the middle of, you know, all the shutdowns and all, because we were running a program at that time.
That's right. You girls were the first buyers agency that was sort of interacting with our software, and we got a lot of feedback from that. I remember you ran an academy, was so you had heaps of students as well, I remember.
Yep. Just curious, for our audience, what is HTAG in simple terms?
Good question. Eliminating opportunity cost. What is opportunity cost? The opportunity cost is the cost of investing in an inferior location, because growth compounds the same way, you know, I guess lack of compounds as well. So you can actually hold the liability as opposed to an asset. So we try to provide as much information as we can so people can triangulate their decision making. So they can look at a particular area from multiple angles to understand, I guess, the story that the area tells, you know. And in doing so, be able to predict what's going to happen in the short term, mid-term, and long term. But essentially, the utility of it is, you know, you need to make the decision, you need to make the right decision in order to make sure that you're on the path of building your portfolio as you envisioned.
So it's data, but you still need to build a story and narrative.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I always say there's one thing to have figures on a page, yet another to understand the story they tell. I think that's the crucial missing puzzle or piece in the industry where, we need to connect things into a logic that has no gaps in argument. So not to be too abstract, I guess what I want to say is that we need to understand the flow-on effects between different indicators and metrics and how that will shape the potential of the area short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So this is why I think that there's a huge educational piece that's missing in the industry when it comes to the usage of data. You know, you can have information in front of you, maybe 5, 10, 15 metrics, but you have to understand, okay, how significant are all of these for what I'm trying to achieve? Because not all of them are created equally for every specific brief. And because the brief changes with the individual, you have many different permutations that you have to consider. So that's why the educational piece must be there, because platform in and of themselves, SaaS products, they're sort of, they can be flexible, but to a point. And because there's so many individuals out there who are invested, there's many permutations there or different briefs, or the reasons why they're buying a property. So you need to have the capacity or ability to understand, okay, for this particular individual, these metrics are important in the short term, mid-term, and long term. And you have to explain why.
So data can be misleading. You could totally end up on the wrong path if you don't understand what you're looking at.
Absolutely. I think that what I would say is the biggest error in data use, it would be assuming that everything is the same. That every data point, and let's say use some, that renter to owner ratio is the same as socioeconomic score. For example, I'm just using an example. They're not the same because their meaning and significance is driven by the needs and desires of the individual that's investing, and by their goals. So usually when people use data, they equalize everything. Everything is the same and everything is equally important. And what usually happens as a byproduct of that is that you produce average results. Because if you really think about it, if you assign everything with the same significance, you're not actually comparing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same as not doing anything. So, and then again, that increases opportunity cost and puts you in a location that potentially is inferior to another one that's next door in another state. So yeah, the significance that metrics have on the basis of the brief, the purchase brief, and we can talk about that, is something that's not usually acknowledged in the industry.
So data being misleading can be misleading, but it's also an abused term, right? Because everyone's looking at data.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it's a similar answer. I think data is one piece of the puzzle, Prior to data, now I'm of the belief that everything can be turned into a data point. You just need a lot of repetition, or some repetition to formulate some kind of a pattern. But before we look at the data, we have to understand the individual circumstance. If I want to increase yield, I need to look at the vacancy rates. Mm-hmm. I need to make sure that the vacancy rates are reduction in vacancy rates increases rents. If rents increase, the yield increases if the growth in pricing doesn't keep the same pace. So see how I'm connecting it into a story. But I'm connecting into a story and focusing on vacancy rate specifically because my client is looking for a cash flow positive area, for example. So the misuse of data eventuates from a lot of people not understanding that strategy piece up front or the strategy attachment. So what's strategy? Strategy is, okay, an overarching strategy can be, I want to get to X amount of dollars within the next passive income in the next 10 years. When we deconstruct that, we come to a position where we understand whether the client is in the acquisition phase or the consolidation phase. By acquisition phase, I mean, are they acquiring growth assets? By consolidation phase, I mean, are they now focusing on cash flow? So if they're, and I'm looking at a bird's eye view now, I can get much more specific. If they're in the acquisition phase, then that means they're after growth areas. And if they're after growth areas, metrics that they consider would change if we compare it to a brief that's looking for cash flow.
Yeah.
So you need to understand the financial circumstance, the goals, the purchase brief that's coming, and that will shape how you actually use data. If you don't have that clearly defined, you're misusing the data.
So what's happening out there in the industry today? If you look at data,
that's mainly what's happening. What I have to say is that what is happening is that people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand significance of a strategy and significance of the purchase brief. And then another thing that they don't understand is, okay, how does that affect the significance of metrics? And let me give you an example. Now, we have to understand what causes growth. Growth is simply caused, economics 101, supply scarcity, increasing demand. That's it.
Yep.
There's nothing more to it, essentially. So if I'm looking, and again, there's another layer to that. Every metric has a different timestamp associated to it. And timestamps of the metric refer to its ability to tell us what's going to happen in the future. Now, in order to know what's going to happen in the far distant future, we have to have a trend established for each metric that's long-term. If you have short-term trends, you can only predict short-term into the future. Now, why is that implied? Property is a liquid asset. It doesn't exchange hands regularly. So if you have an established trend for a metric, you can infer that X amount of years. If you have 5-year trend for supply and demand metrics, for example, that we have on our website, allowing for contingency, you can definitely assume that it will continue 2 years into the future. Because, for example, as nosediving days on market trend, for it to shift to an equilibrium, it would need, 2 years of extreme days on market, high levels of days on market for it to start shifting. So to answer the question, the misuse is this. There's no brief created, then that brief does not inform which metrics have significance, and then also that should inform, the timestamp related to the metrics. Because at the end of the day, we're in the game of prediction. We need to predict what's going to happen. So the misuse is the misunderstanding of the timestamp of the metrics and the misunderstanding of the significance of each metric. I'll give you an example. Let's say if I want to be in the market for 3 years, I just want to get in and out. It can suit some people, whether it's a development strategy, and I see property being traded more and more these days. It's not like buy and hold anymore. People are more inclined to go into a market, take advantage of the pump and then exit. Perth is a good example. So it might suit some people. So if you're looking at a 3-year potential performance of an area, you need to look at only the metrics. You don't have to look at everything under the sun, because the more you add to it, the more you're averaging results. The more you're pulling the database or results in many different directions, which are not necessary. So you need to focus specifically on the metrics that first are level 1 in the hierarchy, i.e. have a high correlation to an outcome, and in this instance is growth. And then B, you need to look at the metrics which tell you how the area will perform in those 3 years. I don't need to look at the 7-year metric.
Does HTAG give you that information?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
That what the growth might be over the next 3 years.
So it doesn't give you the growth will be 20%. Although you can by superimposing and triangulate a couple of metrics, you can understand that. You can come to a conclusion of what it will be, but it will definitely tell you whether it's going to be a hotspot for the next 3 years, whether it's going to be 2 years of a warm spot and then hotspot for 4 years. You can definitely layer the metrics in that way to give you the exact timestamps or different cycles for a particular area. And you would, for example, if somebody has an investment time horizon between 3 or 4 years, if we take on average that a hotspot lasts anywhere between 1 to 4, that means that these guys need to enter an area that is transitioning into a hotspot already at the beginning of the cycle of it being a hotspot, to take full advantage of that.
But I'm curious though, if a bunch of people are looking at the same data, they're going to have similar outcomes, right?
No, they won't, because they all have different briefs.
Different briefs. Okay. So, but if say if a group of people continue buying in a particular pocket because the data says so, and then they exit the market, what would that mean?
You mean self-fulfilling prophecy? Is that what you're referring to?
No, not self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just that, a market, like I guess Perth, I won't use Perth as an example. I'll use a regional town. Yeah. It's like Townsville. It comes up a lot in our conversations with our clients.
Absolutely, yeah.
Might read that someone bought or their friend bought there. And there's relatively higher yield there. And if a group of people continue buying there and then they all decide to leave that market, what does that mean for that market? But they may be looking at data and saying, well, the data pointed us in that direction.
Yeah, so the data will point them. So now, if we first understand why they want to invest in Townsville. If they want to invest in Townsville to take advantage of the hotspot wave, then the next question is, when do you want to exit? I would ask him. So if they're going to invest in Townsville now, at the peak of it being a hotspot, they want to hold it long term, they need to be comfortable with the fact that their long-term averages are going to be lower.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because they entered at the peak of the market, it's going to subside as an elastic band where it reaches a point of resistance. It comes back, it's going to subside. And because they entered at the hotspot, peak of the hotspot, their long-term averages will be lower. Now, if they enter at Townsville to exit in 2 years, hypothetically, then that could be a right play, just finding the assets.
So you need to be very careful when you're picking these spots, because if you get stuck in there, then you may not be able to sell for a long period of time, perhaps not make the same amount of gains that other people may have made, and you might be following.
Absolutely. And see, this is the problem. The problem, people get attracted by the shiny coin. I do too. Everyone does.
Yeah.
But we need to I guess, put that to the side and actually, again, understand the area from short, midterm, long-term potential and how that works with our brief or our goal. Now, every member that we have in HTAG or in Mastermind, I always ask them, okay, give me the answers to these 4 questions. What is your budget? What is your investment time horizon? When do you plan to extract equity into the subsequent purchase? And what is your risk profile? So they need to enter those 4 questions, and those 4 questions have multiple sub-questions, but there will be, that tells me if they say, I want to hold the asset long-term, okay, but I want to extract equity in the next 3 years, I would say Townsville is not for you. Because yes, it will give you the equity extraction time frame in 3 years, but your long-term will be compromised.
Yep.
So I'll say you need to move a bit before the hotspot. You need to invest in Melbourne, for example, to enter the Melbourne market, where it's sort of transitioning into a hotspot. It will be a hotspot in the next 2 or 3 years. Extract the equity, but you still have sufficient fundamentals there for it to carry a long term.
Fundamentals is the word, right? Because data in isolation can't give you that answer, because earlier on you referred to the projects that were happening in Western Sydney or Southwestern Sydney, which fueled the growth. So what's your take on adding your research around projects and infrastructure with data to make decisions?
That's all data. Everything is data. When I say everything is data, I don't want to dehumanize, investment, but everything is data. Even infrastructure spending, is a form of data that you can use and see, and you can track infrastructure spending across different time frames. You can make projections from it. You can do all of these other things, So it definitely, again, I always encourage people not to make a decision on a particular area by looking at an isolated domain. Like, what I mean by that, I always say to people, what can you tell me about an area if I just told you that it's had 15% growth in the last year? What can you tell me about its performance, short-term, mid-term, and long-term? You can't tell me anything.
Well, a lot of people are looking at the past, and that's problematic as well, because, we've had clients who said, oh, Melbourne's had bad rep, I will not buy there. But that's the time we're really getting into that market. Yeah,
so that's counter-cyclical investing, absolutely. Now we can only make decisions on the basis of what has happened before. But we need trends. We need long periods of time passing so we can ascertain and see where the area is in the position of the life cycle or of the cycle of growth. Now, I said, what can you tell me about the area from last year growth? That's like a small slice. You can't really discern anything from that, And coming back to the infrastructure question, I always advise people, this is why Alex and I are always working on introducing more metrics. Now, we have currently 100 metrics on the platform, literally 100. So that might seem a lot. In some instances, you don't have to analyze an area from 100 data points.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to from 40. And one of those points will be infrastructure spending as well. So it is understanding at what point do I need to include 40, at what point do I need to include 15, at what point I can include 100, and at what point it's unnecessary to do so. So those are the little nuances that you have to work with. The more data points you have to look at an area, the more information you can have. But then you'll reach a point where, sometimes it's not necessary to look at, 3-year rent changes and, like, let's say the changes in the rent of the last 3 years. I don't care about the changes in the rent of the last 3 years if I have a growth play.
Yeah, well, I guess one of our clients did ask us or raise this with us. So this particular area had really high vacancy in 2020. And we said, okay, well, I guess, that's quite some time ago. So we have to look at where we are at right now as well. I know history is important.
Yeah, so I always said that buyer's agents are also psychologists at the same time, and it's a hard job. And and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in all the positive ways. Why do I say that? Because there's a huge educational element that you need to provide to people so they understand that things are cyclical.
Yeah.
Things are cyclical, they move in cycles. And also the most important thing, I guess one of the other crucial mistakes, which more so investors do than buyers agents, is they assume that an area can be perfect.
Can be perfect.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't. You can't tick every box.
Absolutely not. So your job or our job as professionals is to increase the probability of a particular outcome. Our job is not to deal with certainty. So we dot the I's and cross the T's to make sure that our probability is 80 or 90%, but we're never going to get to the 100%.
Yeah, well, years ago, I had a conversation with someone who wanted assistance, and they said, oh, well, you have to guarantee that these are the returns I'm going to get over this period of time. And my view is property is also an emotions game, right? It's humans involved. We can't predict with certainty where the market will go.
See, what usually I say to those clients is I ask them, what do you do for a living? You know, and they say, I'm an engineer, whatever it is. And then I take an example from their own personal experience and say, can you tell me with certainty that it will happen, that you'll get a pay rise next year? It's just, you need to reposition the question a different way so they understand what kind of a silly question they're asking, you know? Now, as professionals, we have to be competent enough to increase dramatically that probability. And usually if the methodology is correct, it's correct 95 to 99% of the times. But, you know, people who expect you to say with certainty something, they're just not conscious enough of themselves. And those are hard clients to deal with. Clients that are willing to be educated and absorb new information, they're beautiful clients. But clients who, you know, again, those are the clients that are attracted by the shiny coin the most. Like they see someone post on Facebook that they made such and such returns. I need to make, and I always say to people, another Perth might not come along for another decade. You have to deal with that. You have to accept what the market gives you. You have to pick the best spot in the market that the market provides, but that might not be 35% growth annual. Absolutely. It might be 7.
Yeah.
But you're still beating the averages.
Yeah.
You need to beat the averages. Sure. Yeah.
And I guess people have that mindset, right? You referred to earlier that many people want to buy today and then get out of the market in 3 years with profits, and they want to pretty much, in a way, trade property. But I don't know if it's always practical. I know people have managed to do that in Perth, possibly. In a rising market, maybe they could jump in at the bottom and potentially have gains, but possibly in capital cities and regional if you get it right. But I think it's very hard to spot, like, where could you get in and get out quickly.
Now you can sort of, to a high level of probability, understand how the area will perform in the next 4 years. However, it is a dangerous game, and it's a dangerous game, but it's not always possible. You know? Now, again, this is why I always say everything is data. Every data point is a representation of behavior. So investment is a behavioral science. That's what people need to understand. And if it's tied to individual behavior, that means there's a huge level of unpredictability and uncertainty in everything, because you can't predict everyone's behavior. We're not machines. So by saying that, also then coming back to timing, if that's the fundamental ontological aspect, coming back to timing, you can't always understand when to enter and when to exit. And then there's also psychology. Oh, you will pump more. I'll hold for it for another year. And then it subsides. Yeah. And then when you want to sell, everyone is selling. Your asset is not appealing enough, so nobody wants to buy it.
Yeah.
So that means that you have to time your exit at the point before everyone else starts selling. That's hard to do.
But also choose a quality property that will sell in any market.
Exactly.
Because people just think, oh, I'll buy any.
Exactly. And but the issue with that is, if you enter a hotspot, the hotspots by definition, people, the term hotspotting has ruined our industry. You know. And it's ruined our industry for so many reasons. First one, hotspot for me is not a hotspot for you. But secondly, you know, entering a hotspot, there are huge negative hallmarks. Because hotspots by definition means large amounts of competition, which means you needing to buy an asset that potentially is not the right asset for you if you want to get into that market, and potentially overpaying for that asset, which is why the notion of anticipation for me is much more aligned with my worldview. I want to anticipate where it will move, enter a market, buy an asset that will be good to sell down the track if I choose to do so.
Even in a dead market.
Yeah. So even in a dead market, that's right. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many variables to consider. They're not difficult, but you have to be aware of them to lay them on a paper and then make a decision.
But what's your view of data being used as a marketing gimmick, for the lack of better way of putting it?
Yeah. So I now, depends how you use it. I do think that data can be used as a great value providing exercise. But you need to be able to describe the logic behind it and the story. Then it provides value.
Yeah.
You know, it's used as a marketing gimmick and a tool to show, to supplement your decision making to say this area is good or bad, but the substance is missing usually. Mm-hmm. What's missing is the actual connection and understanding. And I'll give you an example. Like people talk about Townsville, let's say, or some other areas, and they say Townsville is a great investment opportunity. I always say, for who?
Yeah.
Because it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. So if you're explaining Townsville and if you're using some data, connect it into a story and explaining, tell me who's the individual for who this area is actually suited to be invested into, because it's not for everyone.
Yep.
And this is why people get manipulated into wrong decision making.
Well, if 5 buyers agents or property experts are all telling you they chose an area because of data, the same area, then what?
Well, it's I guess the responsibility is on the behalf of the reader to understand what they're reading. Sort of the responsibility is. I mean, otherwise we just machines just following what people say. But you need to look into it and say, oh, the experts are saying it, but tell me why. Mm-hmm. Is there a why missing in what you're describing?
But what's the obligation of the experts in all of this?
The obligation, in my view, is to always give the why, elaborately.
Yep.
Yeah.
To provide a detailed explanation. It might not be palatable as a marketing campaign, but you need to just explain your position in detail. You can't have any arguments. You can't have any holes in your argument. You just can't, because I mean, so much we deal. It's funny. I find, and I deal with investors and buyers agents on a regular basis. Okay, and it is one of these weird industries where we are making the biggest outlay of our life, and yet we're investing less time than searching for the next Airbnb. We actually, when we're booking the next holiday, we will go through so many websites and recommendations and where the best restaurants are, and we'll do all of these things. We spend much more time than actually sitting down and researching for the biggest outlay we're going to make in our life. And then and usually some people who work with me for a long time, they understand where I'm coming from. But for the first time user, it's like, why are you overcomplicating things? No, I'm not overcomplicating. I'm telling you what is necessary to understand. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, everyone wants to have shortcuts. Not everyone. Generalizing, for effect at least. People want to have shortcuts and to get to that, shiny coin faster.
Yep.
And it's unnecessary because the learning curve is not that big. You need the learning curve of 2 months.
But AI is making it different, right? AI is changing things, artificial intelligence. And I know you guys are also investing in AI.
Yeah, so we are investing heavily in AI. Now, in order for AI to give you an output, it needs to be trained on property investment data. And language models currently are not trained on that. So AI is changing things from a theoretical standpoint to put out information that you can learn from. But I don't think it's actually there yet that you can make a specific decision from it. AI can't tell you projections, you can't put in your brief, AI spits all the possible permutations, and it will get there one day. So what we're investing in that educational aspect. So what we would like to see is we would like our users to be able to interact with data more in a live format, when they're searching or looking at suburb pages, they can ask the AI questions that allows them to interpret what they're seeing in a much better way and construct that story. So that will be very helpful because, again, as we said at the onset, huge part of using data is that educational piece. So we want to build that educational piece to really assist the users. But when it comes to solving all the problems, AI will never replace buyer's agents. It's just not possible because AI can't execute things,
There's a lot of moving parts with property deals, a lot of nuances that you need to.
The phone calls that you guys have to make, the due diligence that you have to conduct,
yep.
The open house you have to visit, the sales agents you have to speak to, the negotiation tactics you have to employ. This is all, and this is why I get asked regularly, and usually people who don't have, I guess, a vision, they ask me, will your platform replace buyer's agents? Never. When you really think about it, how can it replace?
Yeah.
What my platform is going to go and execute a deal for someone?
No.
No way. And there's so many nuances there. I mean, think about it this way. You're dealing with how many psychologists? You're dealing with the psychology of the investor, which is nuanced and it's hard to capture. And it's also changing from day to day. You'll have one decision made by your client today, and then tomorrow they call you, no, I changed my mind, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you're dealing with sales agents, you're dealing with owners, you're dealing with pest building inspection, building manager. It's just not possible.
Too many moving parts, too many things to tick off, really. Like going through a deal just over the last week. It came on the market on Thursday. Would AI execute it to have the contract signed by Friday to close the deal?
Yeah, no way. Well, what's going to happen is that I guess technology is moving in a direction where it's going to make it easier for you guys to collect all of the information that you need in one place and much faster, which is great, which means that essentially it increases your profit margins because you don't need to spend as much time doing certain things and doing the legwork, as you said, at the onset and calculating, by hand projections or whatnot. But at the end of the day, when you really think about it, that's going to place even a higher onus on execution, which means that those people who can execute better will definitely have a more viable business. It's going to place more. When you take care of one side of your service, the other side of the service actually becomes more important. So that back end of the service is actually being much more important, which is why we see, for example, a lot of buyers agents doing just negotiation-only services, for example.
Matt, going back to HTAG as a platform, you're seeing data every day, you're seeing trends, you're probably in the trenches even if you're not out there buying. What are you seeing in terms of different capital cities being overvalued or undervalued?
Yeah, I don't look at it in terms of undervalued, overvalued. I look at it in terms of cycles. So where the position that the state is, let's use the state is in a cycle. I believe that Perth is at its peak and it's trending down. I don't know how long it's going to take, maybe 2 years.
But yield is still strong, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you just see again, are we placing too much significance on yield? What if unaffordability has increased to a level which causes a friction point for owner occupiers?
Yeah.
So again, it's
the growth may not be there.
And when I say Perth, again, caution. I'm speaking about a market that has many different sub-markets in a monolith way. Like I don't want to do that. There's many different markets within markets. But essentially, if we look at it as a state, it's sort of had its peak, and we can see that from the movements in purchasing. I think that Queensland in general is still, especially regional Queensland, it's still a hotspot. It's not at its peak, but it's probably close to. And I think Melbourne is transitioning, for example, between, it's in the warm spot, transitioning to a hotspot territory potentially. We'll see 10+% growth in the next 2 years annually,
Yeah.
And that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm seeing.
Yep. And Brisbane, where would Brisbane sit?
Brisbane is catered to higher price points, and it's funny. Most of the briefs that we get at HTAG, for example, are for price point 550K and below or 650 and below.
Yeah.
I mean, Melbourne is not 650 and below. Melbourne is around 750.
Yeah, for a decent property.
Correct, but Brisbane is more of a higher price market.
Yes.
And usually doesn't come up in my shortlist because of the price point. Remember the 4 questions. What is your budget is the first one. I do think that Brisbane, if I look at the state, it's probably lagging the regional market in the sense that regional market turned into a hotspot first, and potentially Brisbane will be next for higher price points. But I can't really comment on it specifically because I haven't had a look at the Brisbane data for a while.
Yeah.
And we're talking about houses, yeah?
Yeah. Houses.
Yeah. So I'm not sure where it actually sits. I do know that if I search for 1.1 mil, a lot of Brisbane areas, good investment locations in the next couple of years, a lot of Brisbane areas come up, but those briefs are very rare.
What about Adelaide?
Adelaide, interesting. Adelaide, I think, again, depending on the price point, I think it's more like Perth. I think because Adelaide hasn't grown that substantially. Well, when you look at it long term, Adelaide's grown more than Perth. But in the last couple of years, Adelaide was also pumping, if you will, if I'm going to use a crypto analogy, But I think it's
pumping.
Yeah, I use it all the time. But I think it's coming off its peak more. I think the focus is mainly. By the way, I'm speaking about investors, yeah?
Yeah.
So the owner-occupier cohort is twice as large a cohort than investor cohort. So there might be still activity in Adelaide. But if you want to take advantage of a particular position in the cycle, I'd rather divert my attention to Melbourne than Adelaide.
Yeah, in Sydney.
Sydney.
Sydney is interesting. I think we've done a recent masterclass, and the topic was markets that will be most sensitive to interest rate drops or changes. And it's usually higher priced markets, which sort of put Sydney in that play. I know Western Sydney definitely still has some steam to go, but I don't think I would just need to see how much the interest rate drops and how that impacts the market. I don't think Sydney is like, it's not going down, it's not going up. It's flat.
Yeah. But do you see that changing?
It's funny when like in our filtering, for example, when you the way our platform is structured is that you organize a collection of filters on the basis of a particular brief, and then I could see the transition between suburbs that are showing up in the shortlist as time goes by. So when people were looking at Perth, Townsville was coming up in the shortlist based on an arrangement of metrics. Then it was Cairns. Now it's Melbourne. And now it's also Northern Territory, by the way, which is interesting. Some suburbs.
Hobart? No.
No Hobart, no Sydney. So just by looking at that, I say that Sydney has probably a couple of years more extended to Melbourne.
But that's because of the metrics people want to, or the outcomes they're looking for.
Yeah, but that's right. But it's a couple of step process. So the first step or in the filtering usually is aligned with everyone, as in you need to include those crucial metrics, but not too many. You just need to eliminate noise. Data, confidence, risk, socioeconomics, affordability, and then you restrict the supply.
Yeah.
So those are the key metrics, because supply you can't control, demand you can control, i.e., let's say 1,500 customers in HTAG all go in one area, we control the demand. Yeah. But we can't control the supply, which is why I restrict that. So essentially, those components need to be present in every market. And if Sydney's not coming up in those shortlist, it tells me that either there's no restricted supply yet, because if there's no restricted supply, even if there's rampant demand, you're going to have price stagnation. So, yeah.
Data could be misleading though as well, right? If someone picks a suburb in the regional areas with minimal population, but the data shows great activity based on maybe a small number of sales, like what would be your advice to anyone using either HTAG or any platform to be discerning?
Yeah, so first, population doesn't have a high correlation to positive growth.
So if it's like
so small population towns have seen 100% growth in the last decade. You have plenty of them. Mildura is one example. But you have many more. So now we have to decide what are we doing? What are we in the business? In the business of what? Investing into property for growth. So we have to understand what metrics have a higher correlation to an outcome. And if you search any database, you'll see that there are many regional towns, smaller regional towns that have had substantial growth in the past. Now, the question is, will they have it in the future? And then you need to layer metrics and understand whether there is an opportunity for that to happen. I think, and you pinpoint one crucial aspect, I think, and I'm all in the myth busting, that's my business essentially. I love busting myths. For example, vacant land equals oversupply. That's another fallacy that I believe is not there. But try to look at an area from many different angles. Try to see its short-term, mid-term, and long-term potential. And then if you want to place population as a risk factor, you can. It is at your discretion. Just make sure that you understand. And you can do that from a search. Filter 5,000 less population and see growth patterns across different timeframes. So if the area has grown before substantially in small population towns, you have to decide what kind of level of significance you want to assign to that number.
Going back to your point on vacant land doesn't equal oversupply. That's an interesting one because Melbourne's got a lot of land.
That's right. Yeah, it's got a lot of land. Now, there's a couple of degrees of separation between vacant land and stock on market. So for vacant land to turn into stock on market, you need to have building approvals. Now, then building approvals take 2 years for them to be built. So there's a time factor as well involved. Now, there's another factor, cash flow factor, and a friction point of councils. That's important. So if you have a lot of vacant land, not all of it can become stock on market at once, because developers, and I work for developers are very careful about cash flow. So they will always release in stages. Okay. Now, then there's a third element. Okay, how much is the population growing in a particular area? I'll give you an example. Melton LGA in Melbourne. Not all of the LGA, some areas in the LGA have higher building approval numbers, yeah? But Melton LGA has been the fastest growing LGA, 6% growth, population growth, the fastest growing area in Australia. So when you really do the bit of arithmetic, you realize that actually the building approvals are not keeping pace with the population growth. So again, contextual, triangular.
There's vacancy though. There's a lot of vacancy
in some parts of it.
Again, if there's absolutely. There's vacancies in some. But the next question that we have to ask is, will vacancy in one suburb corrode the appeal of another?
Yeah.
The answer is no.
No. So there's different pockets that you need to look at. Not
absolutely. Well, I guess, again, common sense. If you look at any LGA in Australia, you'll see that every single suburb within that LGA has grown at different rates.
Yep.
Some have grown not at all, essentially. Some have grown more.
So you can't write off an entire pocket just because.
No. I'll give you an example from where I live. I live in southwest Sydney, and I bought there, as I said, because of everything that was going on. There are areas in southwest Sydney that have seen minus 3% growth in a decade. There are areas that have seen plus 200. So if I've completely discounted the, let's say the Camden or Campbelltown LGAs, because one of those suburbs within those LGAs didn't have any appeal, I would have missed out on 200% growth in Harrington Grove, for example. So it's again, markets within markets, which is why I said, Perth, I can't paint it with the same brush, everything. But in analysis, you have to go as close to the purchase point as possible.
Yeah.
So there are some buyers agents approach the analysis and to stop at the LGA level. I think that's dangerous because suburbs within an LGA can move in different. Yep. I mean, look at Townsville. Townsville is an interesting example because most of the suburbs have experienced substantial growth, but some have experienced 40%, some 8%.
Yep.
There's a reason for it.
Yeah. Interesting.
So you can't really just throw a dart in Townsville and think that all of them are going to grow at the same rate. It's not the case.
Yeah. Well, I guess ideally you'd look at like the big picture, the overall cycles across the country.
Funnel.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. So you go from Australia wide, you go to state, you go to a funnel, but at the end of the day, you have to come, as I said, as close to the purchase point as possible. Now, in future, we'll also provide sub-suburb analytics, so you guys can know which streets are better, which pockets are better, and this is
Housing Commission data. Something.
Yeah. So it's coming very soon, actually. We're going to layer over heat maps. So, you as buyers agents know that there are certain pockets within a suburb that are better than others, and growth can vary between 5 to 20%. So you have to then, when you have to make a decision, you have to go as close to the purchase point as possible. You can't stop at an aggregated LGA level because think about it, within the same LGA, you can have, let's say there's 15 suburbs. You can have 10 suburbs with high volumes of sales and high data confidence and 5 suburbs that have low data confidence.
Yeah.
And stopping at an aggregated LGA level just because of those 5 will pollute or corrode the 10.
Yeah.
You might be misled. So you need to go to the purchase point where you can actually make a decision.
I think it's also important to understand though, right? We are not economists and data is only really a guide coupled with, as you said, infrastructure is also a data point. Those are the big picture items that you're looking at to understand where to buy, what to buy. And property cycles do play a big part.
Yeah. I mean, think about it this way. Again, think about what does it mean to have infrastructure spending, reduce it to behavior. Everything that you're looking at, reduce it to behavior. What does infrastructure spending mean? Infrastructure spending means potential for population growth. That's 2 degrees of separation, I would say. It means also increased purchasing power and liquidity within the area because most of the workers are working within the LGA or a couple of surrounding LGAs. So that means there's bigger purchasing power of people who are actually residing there, which potentially influence purchasing patterns of property, you know. So think about how that will influence. Now, the only thing is determining, okay, how long it will take for that increased investment into the area to trickle down into the pockets. And because there's a difference between ability to purchase and willingness to purchase. This is what people also sometimes misinterpret. Now, there are a lot of areas in Australia where people have the ability to purchase. The Newman in WA, one example. Highest median wage nearly in WA and in Australia, highest employment levels. And yet the property market has grown minus 50% in a decade. So people have the ability to purchase, but because the fly in, fly out centralized industry arrangement, people don't have the willingness to buy.
Right. Sure thing. So, Matt, like you obviously have buyers agents as your clients or users of HTAG, but what about everyday investors? So if they wanted to access the platform, is it catered to them as well?
Yeah, so it is absolutely, but which is why we created the mastermind community. We realized you need that huge educational bit. So everyone who subscribes to HTAG also has access to mastermind, depending on the levels of their subscription. And this is where they either have access to free mini courses or tailored coaching from me. There's many different, I guess, onboarding processes and strategies that we employ to make sure that people know how to use the information. Yeah.
So if there's an investor looking to get started and they wanted to access data, then they can go to your website and sign up.
Yeah, they go to website, sign up. Again, depending on the level of subscription, I think 6-month subscribers get access to tailored coaching from me, plus the mini courses, while the 1-month subscribers, I've created mini courses, 4 or 5, that talk about every stage in detail, so they can actually use that to assist them with actually how to use, you know, the information that's in front of them. Yeah.
Great, awesome. That would be very useful for anyone wanting to get started and getting easy access to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as I always say, that's one part of the story. And, you know, we had a lot of, I'll give you an example. So in our mastermind community, we have the investor side and the buyer's agent side. But what we're trying to do now, we're trying to create an ecosystem where everyone can speak to each other, because we find out, I get contact from investors asking me, Matt, do you have any buyer's agents that can, you know, purchase from me? Because they find an area, but they have full-time jobs. They're feeding their families through other means, you know. So they can't actually go to open homes, contact agents, do all of these other things. So we figured out, why not, you know, create a mechanism where people who participate more, show their skills and education, are rewarded, where they can actually access the investor groups, and if need be, an investor needs them to execute, they can execute for them. It's happened many times. Because even investors who buy our subscription, again, they buy our subscription or they subscribe, they find an area, but, you know, 5 out of 10 times they need a buyer's agent to execute.
Yeah, it's execution.
They might end up picking the wrong area too, because they just don't have the narrative or the story.
Yeah, so usually we provide them with the narrative and the story.
As part of your coaching.
The coaching,
yeah, sure.
Usually provide them and I try, but then the buyer's agent.
But a lot of work goes in the execution part.
Absolutely. That's
very time consuming.
There's a huge element to that, which is why, you know, people ask me, do you want to be a buyer's agent? No. No, not because it's a hard job. I don't have the time. I don't want to dabble in it. I don't have the skills for it. You know, we purchase property for ourselves, and we're buying actually in 2025 rather aggressively. We're going to buy under HTAG for HTAG. But you know, it is not my full-time job. My full-time job is something else.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
You know, just being on the phone and creating relationship with sales agents, the negotiation tactics as well, the nuances there. You know, what do you say on the phone to a sales agent first?
Yeah. How do you layer the conversation? Where things go? So there's a lot that goes into it.
But question, I know you don't like these questions. What's the top hotspot right now?
For who?
True.
Yeah.
For who? So Cairns and Townsville are hotspots.
But it's too late then.
I think it's got to maybe a bit more than Perth. Probably another 2.5 years of 50% average annually.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
But to any listeners, obviously this is not financial advice or property advice. So
absolutely. And as I said, depends on who. Like we haven't mentioned, you know, their long-term strategies at all. I think Melbourne is shaping up to be great. What is interesting about Melbourne is that, or GCC region, not Greater Capital City region, not the regional areas.
Yeah.
It's interesting that there's 20 or 30 or 40 people bidding for the same house now. It's happening.
Yep.
Yet the
Seen that.
price is lagging. The price growth is lagging.
Yeah.
So what we're going to see, we're going to see a substantial burst.
Yep.
Very soon.
Let's pause.
Yeah.
Let's pause for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's buy a few properties before it moves.
Not to mention areas.
No. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want the market to be on pause
Until we are done.
as long as there are listings and
Yeah.
our clients can buy good properties.
It's proving difficult, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Matt, for joining us today, and it was a very powerful session on data. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for inviting me. Anytime you want to chat, let me know. I love doing this. I appreciate the invite.
That's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, share it with fellow investors and leave us a review and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Join us next time for another episode of Property Addicts Australia.